Welcome, Anand from S-Docs. I'm excited to have you here today.
All right, excited to be here. Thanks, Avinash and John.
We typically start out with usually the first question. So, from S-Docs, pretty popular app on the Salesforce App Exchange, etc. Where did the S-Docs name come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, it's actually a fun puzzle that we actually have new hires go through. Is like, what do you think S stands for? Obviously, we're a document automation company, so Docs make sense. But I think it started out as Salesforce Docs because the founder was a former Salesforce architect, and it started there. But I think it's since morphed into many things. Simple, secure, scalable, I think is probably the best way to kind of like say what S stands for. But it could be a lot more, right? Like we went through a rebrand last year. Our logo changed, as you could see, but we actually went through the process of like, do we change our name to something else? And we landed on no, it actually represents more things. And you know, we'll talk a little more about where is S-Talks headed, and S still is very relevant.
Not to do a pun, but it's also it is simple, right? It's just like it's a simple name, another S, right? Awesome. So to back up a little bit, before S docs, etc. What was your journey and what was Anand doing before getting into S docs and that side of
Yeah.
things?
So I'll start with probably even pre-Salesforce. So it's kind of like in kind of more in the Java world. Worked as a contractor for many healthcare customers. Was with Cognizant Technologies. Came to the US and started out with Salesforce in 2008, right around the time when a lot of people are like, "What's Salesforce again?" Um, so I started there. Spent 15 years at Salesforce, grew from being kind of like a newbie to kind of their top architect. I'm the guy that they call in when there's a pretty nasty customer that people are like scratching, like, how the heck are we going to deliver this? And I'm usually the guy that gets called. So I did that for 15 years, certified architect myself. And I was certified architect number 11 because I had to certify the first 10. So very involved in the CTO ecosystem, CTA ecosystem, seen many boards for those that are familiar with the CTA board. So yeah, I'm still pretty tightly knit. So that was 15 years of seen kind of like large enterprise customers. Obviously cannot name names for confidentiality reasons, but there's not a thing that I have not dealt with at Salesforce. Core Salesforce, I should say. A little bit of marketing cloud, implemented the first large implementation of Data Cloud before it was called Data Cloud. It was called CDP. It was called something in between, called Genie in between. So all that aside, so that's so all that wealth of knowledge with Salesforce, with enterprise, led me to essentially the way I think about this, and we'll cover this a little bit in a future question that you guys have, I think. But I see the world of enterprise implementations as three things, right? So you have projects, you have programs, and you have products. And depending on the vantage point that you see, you continue to see every implementation as projects, or which is basically like, one and done small things. Or you look at, um, there is something where there is more than just a project, which becomes a program, digital transformation, you call it whatnot. And in my 15 years, my vantage point has been products where it's always a repeatable pattern that I constantly see. And I've always been that kind. And that's kind of like what the muscle that I want to exercise, which is the product muscle. And certainly Salesforce had a lot of opportunity. I tried never nearly anything that materialized. And right around that time, around the 2023 timeframe, Dan Pajanovic, who was the founder, knocked my doors and said, he's still interested in coming on board. And I said, sure, but we need to think more bigger. And he was excited about what I thought the vision could be for the company. And that's how I landed at Asda.
Awesome. And when you say product, can you expand on that a little bit? Because when you say the three P's you kind of talked about, right? Programs, etc. So can you go into a little bit more about what you mean by product? Like it's sometimes an app or product. Yeah.
Yeah. So a little bit of S-Docs' origin story, right? Dan was working at a Salesforce customer who was kind of like dealing with, hey, we need to send out these PDFs to customers. What can you do, right? So he implemented a little bit of this, and he went on to his next customer, and he saw the same problem again and again, right? Like, so that's when his product muscle flexed a little bit. I'm like, well, let's go look in the App Exchange and see who they are, right? Like, there was all of one App Exchange vendor, and this is circa 2012, and there's probably a lot more today. And that's kind of like the genesis. And that's like the product mindset where you kind of see these repeatable patterns of problems. One more P, right? So you go from problems to projects, programs to products. And in some cases, people stop at programs and don't think about products. But if you go that far, you start to think about products. And every day, Avinash and you guys deal with implementations, you see a pattern that you start to think about, can that pattern become a product? Some patterns may not, some patterns do. Does that help, John?
It does. Yep.
So would you say transitioning to that product, it's almost sits at a like a higher maturity curve?
Say that one more time, Avinash. Sorry.
So you said something like the various P's would start with something like projects, process, and whatever ends with product.
Yeah.
So does a product sit at a higher maturity curve?
I would say so, right? Like, it's also a scale thing. I think from a maturity standpoint, yes, but it's also a scale thing, right? Like, you could think of, there's probably a pattern, but is that pattern happening a few times, a few hundred times, a few thousand times, or a few million times? And that's where, something stop. If it's a few tens of times, maybe it's just worth having a playbook. Sorry, one more P. It just feels like it's rolling at me. But maybe it's a playbook that you'd create an accelerator out of and say, okay, we've got something. We're going to just take this playbook to that many customers. And maybe there's economies of scale and time. But if you're doing this more than 100 times, there's probably a product, and there's probably customers that don't know that they actually need this product, which is where the product market fit and all that.
I don't think anyone has summarized this better, the difference between a product and the quick starts that we see on the Implement SI's website.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where you have the patterns. Patterns becomes quick starts. But then at some point, that pattern could become
interesting. And then, so you got into S-Docs, so roughly 4 years ago, if my math is correct. What's kind of transpired from there? Was there continued growth? What was that whole environment and just situation for you the last 3 years being at S-Docs?
Yeah. So one of the things that I came on board with, right? So I came on board, I knew S-Docs, I knew they were a native customer. We have a pretty thriving business. One of our big value propositions, at least in the regulated industries where people don't like their data going off platform, was the fact that we're native, we're all in Salesforce, right? Public sector loves us for exactly that reason. So, but I think as a company, when you get to the scale that we are, in terms of revenue, we also have to think about de-risking ourselves. Right around the 2020 timeframe, Salesforce acquired Velocity. Velocity had DocGen as part of their solution when they went out to market, which now has become Omni Studio, DocGen. So we saw some threats, not to say that that was the only reason, but we also had to de-risk ourselves as a business. And last summer, we actually launched S-Docs for HubSpot. HubSpot is the number 2 CRM. Today, they're slowly and steadily creeping up into Salesforce's business. And I saw that as a point of excitement, partly because it expanded our universe beyond Salesforce. Salesforce has been really good to us. So this is not, hey, we don't like Salesforce. We love Salesforce. Part of the reason we're sponsoring Dreamforce next in 2.5 weeks is exactly that. We've got a pretty decent sized booth. We will continue to be a huge Salesforce shop for that perspective. But then the world of CRM, the world of what tools people use, is beyond Salesforce. And we saw this opportunity to say, what can we do to kind of like tap into that other markets? Most competition, the most common competition is DocuSign. started from the world of like, we'll build the solution, integrate with Salesforce. We started in the world of, we start with Salesforce and now we're like expanding our horizon to be beyond Salesforce. And that's helped us with focus, right? Like we kind of, given the constraint that is Salesforce, the platforms and the governor limits and all that fun stuff, we said, there's a set of constraints that we've actually worked with that's allowed us to get us here, which means we kind of understand the domain, the product domain very, very well, which allowed us to build the HubSpot product really fast and also build it to the point where we've achieved product market fit with that. So that kind of is the journey. And then obviously we'll look beyond and say, what's next?
So you obviously had this journey where, gradually you shifted from being a service person to a product person. How was it like managing people? Because consultants, they're good product problem identifiers. On the product side, people are like engineers, they're like good problem solvers. So managing, like, it's almost like two different mindsets.
Yeah, I think to me, I myself am a lifelong consultant, right? So it took a little bit of recalibration on my side because go back to those continuums of P's. When you're doing projects or programs, you're just focused on one customer. So one of the pivots that anyone needs to make is thinking about, it's no longer one-to-one, it's one-to-many. So what you build is actually needs to be solved for many customers, right? So that's one trait. The second trait is actually also thinking about extensibility and hooks in your product. When you're building programs or projects, you're thinking about some level of extensibility, like custom metadata, custom settings. But when you're building products, you have to think about how's an admin that you have never interacted with going to configure your product. It's not as simple as like, hey, here's a guide that you can go set up, right? Like you have to think about that admin config experience. And that's not natural for engineers. Engineer tends to be in code, not in config. And how do you kind of like bridge that gap with configuration is another area that you have to think about, right?
And this is, and again, I know it's not an odd question, but something I've always been thinking about pretty much since 2008. I'm not sure if it's something that you want to discuss, but like, so why do you feel that what S-Docs does seems to me a simple core case capability that should be in Salesforce? Like you've said, it's like, hey, this is repeated. Like pretty much every customer needs this. PDFs, docs, etc. Do you have your thoughts on why Salesforce wouldn't have that capability, which virtually every Salesforce customer users want? Why isn't Salesforce providing that capability, essentially, quote unquote, out of the box?
Good question. So while I was at Salesforce, since I had access to product leaders, and this is a question that I've asked the platforms, like, guys, why wouldn't you build this? Why would you ask customers to pay for this? One of it is, I think Salesforce looks at them as the digital equivalent in the digital office. And in this day and age, they look at documents as almost like an analog version of it, even though for e-signature and all that, you still need a document. They're saying, well, we want to kind of like, it's not exactly gelling with Salesforce's philosophy of being the digital office or the digital back office or the front office, however you think about it, right? So I think that's one part. Part two is like, I think from a focus perspective, they're focused on the bigger picture of like the business process, the RevOps process, the RLCM process, the service process, the claims process. There's a lot more there than there is to an artifact of documents. And then the last piece, which I think is a big part of the philosophy of Salesforce, is grow and get your ecosystem to grow. And AppExchange, I'm sure you guys know this, but when Benioff started, there was called the App Store. He actually gave the App Store name to Steve Jobs.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So he actually gave because he was a big mentee of Steve. Benioff worked at Apple as an intern. So he actually, in full respect to Steve Jobs, gave the name of App Store to Steve so that Apple can use it. And then he started the AppExchange. So the AppExchange was started because Salesforce cannot and would not have to think about all the problems the world has. Look at all the acquisitions they've made. Steelbrick was an acquisition, was in the AppExchange. velocity and acquisition was in the App Exchange. They've had these organic app exchanges, not just on the product side, but also on the ecosystem side, right? They've acquired Acumen, they've acquired Model Metrics way back when. I'm blanking on one more acquisition that they did, which was based out of Canada, Traction or Demand, and many more, right? So they've seen this ecosystem thrive, and that's why they launched the App Exchange. And they said, if we can't solve it, someone else will. And you've seen the world of document automation thrive. We've had many vendors like DocuSign and others kind of come into.
Okay. Right. So just going back on that product versus services conversation, can someone be both? Or is it better they focus on one thing at a time?
I want to say you start out as both, but very quickly you have to pivot to being one or the other, right? Because when you're a services company, you're going to take what it takes to do the one-to-one and not the one-to-many. So you're going to take, I don't want to call it shortcuts, but you're going to optimize for one customer. When you're a product company, you have to optimize for many customers. And especially, because we're native, it's a little more nuanced than that, right? Because we're a managed package. And as soon as you install the package, you're bound to that version. And then you may build future product updates. And if you don't have like push upgrades, I don't want to geek out a little bit, but if you don't have push upgrades enabled, you're going to have customers with a wide array of versions. Like we have customers that are in version 2.5, which was released like almost 9 years ago, right? Free customer does their job. So whereas with a consulting or an implementation mindset, you're thinking about that from a version control. It's like your production's probably 2 releases behind or 2 branches behind, but you're never going to be in a situation where your production is 10 years behind your current branch. Like that will never happen. So that mindset changes how you perceive things. And then when you build stuff, you're building for this one-to-many situation. And because you do that, very rapidly, you're going to have to figure out, are you on a product or an implementation company? And that's going to change how you build and go to market.
Yeah, because the background behind this question is because we are noticing a lot of like AI startups that are like building the products, they get traction and they seem to be like quickly branching off and consulting is saying okay, we have the product, why don't we just do the consulting ourselves? So that sounded a little bit of like spray paint approach to me. That's the reason I asked that question.
Well, I mean, every product company needs an implementation team. Because if you don't, and again, I think there are examples of both, right? For example, Microsoft, even though they have a professional services company team, they're probably far and few between than the partners that they rely on to implement Microsoft. Same thing with Oracle, same thing with IBM. And I think that's always going to be there. A product company will always need consulting and implementation, but an implementation company doesn't have to have products. So what I've seen more often, Salesforce does this, IBM does this, Accenture does this notion of quick starts or accelerators end up being their way of productizing their implementations. And it's a hit or miss because that's just a package that they drop in and are like not even a Salesforce package. It could be a zip file, whatnot, and they just implement that playbook. But once they're done with that customer, that stays there. And if they made an upgrade to that, they don't really go back to the customer to fix it, right? So one way I think makes sense. The other way, you have to make a decision. If you're a consulting company, you have to make a decision if you want to be a product company, because how you go to market is going to be different. You're going to be the App Exchange. You're going to have to like think about leads, events, all of that fun stuff. Some of it is relevant for consulting partners, but your go-to-market approach changes. You need to have support. With consulting, you have warranties. With product, you need support. You need to have people taking an email or a phone.
Going back a little bit, and those listeners, we typically have a script, but this is such a great discussion. We might be kind of veering in different directions, but or not a script, but it's the questions we kind of follow. But so back to your background, Anand, and I know this is a question and things that people are wrestling in the ecosystem with right now, and it's between config, customization, integration, admins, developers, architects, etc., and the actual skills needed right now to deliver, especially more advanced, complex solutions in the Salesforce ecosystem. A lot of people came from various backgrounds into the Salesforce ecosystem. A lot of people just left, careers in accounting, right, and became Salesforce admins. A lot of people came from the Java, the C++, the custom dev, into Salesforce, and they were doing more Apex and the advanced stuff. And there was like there's been this collision in the last 5 years of all these different backgrounds of people getting in the Salesforce ecosystem. And I've always felt that, at least in the last year and in the future, that that the software development background experience and understanding all those different layers, right? SOA frameworks and development and just the coding background is becoming more and more important, maybe not critical, but important. And it's tough for people that come from other backgrounds outside of software or technology, starting as admins, to back into, the custom dev, the technology backgrounds, writing Java, all that kind of stuff. And I'm seeing that that's just kind of a wrestling kind of happening in the ecosystem the last 1 to 2 years. I guess I'm really curious to hear your perspective on the future of the Salesforce admin, developer, architect, those type of roles and the skills that you need moving forward. Is it going to be where they'll need to have more advanced tech skills, software development, traditional backgrounds like that? Or do you think it still is going to be a pretty open field for people coming in from non-traditional tech backgrounds, such as software dev, et cetera, to still be able to succeed in the Salesforce ecosystem?
Yeah, well, I mean, day after a big splash from Salesforce. So the former Salesforce in me wants to say, well, there's wipe Cody for that. But let's just be realistic about that, right? So people just go gangbusters with wipe coding. It's like, I have an idea. I'm not a tech guy. I'm just going to like expect Cloud Code or Cursor or Lovable or whatever and wipe Cody from yesterday's announcement to kind of like magically solve it. So the answer is yes, there's a tech aspect to this, right? And I think in my mind, if you have a brilliant idea, there's how do you get from 0 to 1, 1 to 100, 100 to 100,000 and a million? And what gets you to 100,000 in revenue will not be what gets you to a million in revenue, right? So you can probably fake it till you make it, maybe to about 100,000. After that, you get really serious and you need the tech partnerships. What they've done with App Exchange is that they offer these things called SDOs, not SDOs, what are they called? Product development organizations. So they have these tech-focused people and partners. And that's a very valid, viable path because there's a lot of people that have awesome ideas, but they don't have the tech chops to do it. So they have these PDOs that partner with these people that have ideas. And these PDOs build the products for them. They're the tech arm of the idea people. So you bring the go-to-market, the sales, the go-to-market, whatnot, and the product ideas. The PDOs build the products, and that's a great combination to have. But at some point, it becomes kind of like an IP situation and intellectual property thing, and then you insource that. And you have, like, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to get to a point where you insource the tech talent. And even that tech has to be like seasoned people that are thinking about like every aspect of Salesforce, right? Like Salesforce is rapidly evolving every day. Like Lightning Web Components wasn't a thing 6 years ago or 5 years ago. Now it's, if you don't have it, they're like, huh? And we're going through that transition, right? Like till I came, there was no Lightning Web Components. I'm like, guys, come on, let's actually build, like, anything has to be Lightning first. It can't be Lightning last. And your average product idea person's not going to think about it that way, right? They may be like, yeah, I understand this Lightning thing, but what does that mean for us? Same thing with Agentforce, right? Like we've been bombarded with Agentforce for the last year or so. What does that really mean for us as a product is something a tech person will have to think about. Because it's all cool and like, oh yeah, this is awesome, NLP and all this. Like, what does this mean for my product and what's the technology I need to build? What does Salesforce offer? You need that tech. And it's not a developer. It's kind of more in the architect archetype, less so a developer. Because developers like, yeah, you can do all this and they'll start coding. That's not the point, right? Like, how do you use the best? Like, and my unique advantage is that because I come from an architect mindset and I know kind of the capability.
Right. What about just even traditional people in the ecosystem that are looking that are admins, right? And just on that side of thing, working for companies, right? Employees, consultants, etc. Do you feel it to be more and more that those tech skills are needed, even just to do Salesforce?
So, yeah, I think so. But I think with this day and age of white coding, you can probably go far along than you did years ago. 3 years ago, once you hit like, I need to write a trigger, people are like, okay. Now I think you can get maybe far along with by putting skills that don't exist today. But even that only takes you that far. Might be unmaintainable code, whatnot, right? Like you really need to like figure this out. But I will say this, right? Funny enough, the most popular app in the App Exchange, and I think it's still within the top 10, believe it or not, is just a collection of reports and dashboards. It's called the User Adoption Dashboard that I think Salesforce offer. It is I believe, the most downloaded App Exchange app in the ecosystem. It has no code. It is all config. It's just a bunch of reports and dashboards. And you could build a very powerful Salesforce objects, lightning page layouts and stuff like that, and still have a very compelling V1 of the app. And that might be very popular too. So I wouldn't root out like Salesforce has a lot of declarative capabilities.
So you've been in this ecosystem, like, you've been like, very native to the Salesforce ecosystem. And now you're building a product which obviously started like Salesforce first. You never really had to like do a hard pivot in terms of like picking up a completely new industry and everything. But obviously you're now a CTO of S-Docs. Did this role ever throw a curveball at you?
I think so, right? Like, I mean, look, we're kind of in a space which is very commoditized, right? Like that. So before I took the job, I'm like, guys, I mean, there's 100 players in this market. How do we distinguish ourselves? I think that thought has come to be is like, how far does document automation go? But I think AI has definitely added a nice wrinkle into this and probably injected some required stuff. But a lot of times, and Salesforce is kind of at that point where HubSpot, if you go and ask a HubSpotter, they'd say Salesforce is too complicated. Come to HubSpot. We can get you up and running in a few weeks. The average Salesforce implementation is anywhere from 6 to 9 months. I would say probably that average is going up, not down. My first project at Salesforce in 2008 was 4 weeks, start to finish. When I left, the largest program that Salesforce had done that till date was 22 months, right? Start and we were not finished. So like the point I'm making is when I came on board, it kind of dawned on me that people are embracing simplicity over complexity. And there is an opportunity to kind of like make what is otherwise a commoditized, quote unquote, complicated world into a simple world. And I think the validation with the HubSpot ecosystem, even though there was a very large incumbent that still owns maybe about 80% of the HubSpot document automation market, even though they were there, what we started to offer suddenly dawned on people like, oh my God, this is so easy. I don't need all of this stuff. And I think that spin allowed us to really rethink about how do we truly build a no-code solution. And if you look at the market, there was a lot of like pro code, right? Like, so the behemoth in this space requires a lot of integration. And our world is like, can we make this simpler, easier so that I don't need 6 months of an integration developer and a MuleSoft developer to actually get it out of the market? So when you start to put constraints on yourself, you start to really think hard and think about the problem, right? Like, and I think that's the reinvention that we did. Like Salesforce is getting complex. HubSpot's trying to reinvent that. And then you have the upcoming upstarts. I mean, I've heard about Attio off late, and they're like, well, we just want to be as simple as a spreadsheet. Airtable started that way. Monday.com started that way. Like you have all of these people that are challenging the status quo, even though the concept of CRM still exists, right? And I feel like, yes, there are curveballs, but then when you kind of like, I fundamentally say, like, and I had a really, I'm just going a little off topic here, but there was a former Google leader that really kind of like inspired me. And we had him come to our town hall recently. And he said, Google, when they were thinking about Waymo, there was a part that was thinking about Waymo and driverless cars, but there was a completely different part that was thinking about ULEVs, which is basically, people that can do vertical takeoffs. They were thinking about flying people, not even cars, when everyone else was thinking about electric cars and all that. So how do you think 10x, and sometimes that 10x could be a curveball, But if you really think hard and flex hard, how do you go from thinking about 1x or 2x and thinking about 10x? That's kind of like where I'm actually more excited about.
I think it was back to the simplicity thing. I think was it Leonardo da Vinci said like simplicity is the highest form of sophistication. And I think the simplicity is kind of what you're getting at as well, as is the simplicity is what enables you to scale. If I'm
Right.
I'm following, right? The more complex, the more difficult it is to scale. So keeping things simple, even basic. I mentioned this on a couple of podcasts. The first thing I do, even with a new client over the last 10 years, is I remove before we even start building anything in Salesforce. It's like, you don't need this, you don't need this, we're going to get rid of this. So it starts as simple as possible, even from like a project perspective, where other people are like, hey, you have all these features, look at all these things in Salesforce. Let's keep adding. And it just grows to this complex monster.
Yeah. Simple is hard. A lot of people don't realize that. Simple is very, 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 very hard. Apple, is the example that everyone uses, right? Like my 84-year-old dad can use an Apple phone without a lot of instructions because it's simple, right? Google, when they started, was a text box and you could type anything and get an answer. ChatGPT's moment was it's a checkbox, but you can ask it natural questions and it can give you an answer, right? So I think in every decade, we've seen examples of this. And I think enterprise software has a history of being complex. And unfortunately, it's an orthodoxy that's like including Salesforce and HubSpot and SAP and NetSuite. And you add any like Workday, all of these are complex products for the end user. And it's so hard because they're so big for them to make that hard pivot.
Yeah. Avinash, I knew you were chiming in there.
Yeah, I was just, since we're on that enterprise SaaS topic, just wanted to pick your brains on like how hard or how easy would it be for an enterprise SaaS to become an AI first versus someone who's starting off as AI first?
Well, one enterprise SaaS has the money, right? The challenge. Let me talk about challenge and opportunity, right? The challenge is always, well, how do we bring all these troves of customers to that new world, right? Like just taking a page out of Salesforce for those that are listening that have been around for Classic. Like I've lived through that. When I was there was a thing called S controls. Most people don't even know what the heck that is. My first project was an S control. And from that to Apex to Visualforce to Aura to Lightning components was a transition, right? But these were like incremental things. But if you think about the Classic to Lightning conversion, it took about 6 years, if not more, right? Funny enough, I still have someone that is in Classic. I'm like, my God, you guys are in Classic. Salesforce is going to retire that. Get rid of it, right? But it's that balance, right? Like when Salesforce made that decision, they didn't build a migration tool. They didn't do anything. I was there when customers like, can you build a migration tool? I'm like, no, we're not building because it's a completely different mindset. So I think it was a very conscious decision, a right decision, because had they not done it, I think they would have lost a lot more, right? Revenue. Right? So back to AI, you need to have that same mindset, right? Like if you've read Benioff's books, right? Benioff started with why can't Salesforce be like Amazon, right? A decade or so later, he said, why can't Salesforce be more like Facebook, the evolution of chatter, right? Then he came back and said, why can't Salesforce be more like, I forget the thing. But now, if I were inside Salesforce as a product leader, the question that I should be asking is, why can't Salesforce be like ChatGPT, right? And when you log into Salesforce, you have all this bells and whistles. I'm like, this is a bit overwhelming for a user, right? Can we just say, what do you want me to do? And are there things you want me to look at that I can go do behind the scenes and just report back to you? Do I even need you to log into Salesforce? Can I just send this to you in Slack and Teams and to your browser? Why do I have to log into Salesforce, right? It's a pretty radical question to ask, right? The Atios and the others of the world are asking that question, right? Perplexity is building a browser with AI right in it. Google's certainly going to do that, right? So it is very hard. And this Perplexity versus Google is a great example, right? Of a startup being able to really do things that the AI cannot. But in the end game, when you think about customers, they need the security, they need the scale, they need the compliance. And at the end of the day, it's going to take you a long time to figure out what customers need when you're an upstart, when you already have that tribal knowledge of what works, what doesn't work. And but wiping the slate clean, and we're actually going through ideations of this where I'm actually challenging my team. We have like Lightning Web Components and all that. So guys, what if we didn't have any UI? Why shouldn't that be us? Why can't someone go to ChatGPT and say, generate an NDA for Acme Egg? Why do I need to log into Salesforce to do that?
So as product needs goes down this AI path, do you think that product could ultimately or eventually wipe out services?
No, so I think it depends on what you mean by services, right? So first and foremost, the core part of a good services/consulting organization is identifying the problem. And I believe I believe Einstein's credited to say the quote that I'm about to say, which is, if I had an hour to solve the problem, I would spend 59 minutes identifying what the problem is, right? And the identification of the problem, unfortunately, isn't an AI thing yet, right? There are upstarts trying to challenge that with like, hey, send all the transcripts for your discovery calls and your conversations and your notes and all this, and then we'll actually figure out the inefficiencies. There are people that are trying to do like process mining, but at the end of the day, people don't know what they don't know, right? And I think that's where a true services implementation partner, a consulting organization comes, is like identifying the problem. Once you've identified the problem, the solution is where AI probably is accelerated. I kind of think AI is augmented as intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because it's augmenting what you're doing today. So what would have otherwise taken you 2 weeks probably takes you a week. Verdict's still out on, whether consulting organizations are going to like go from 9 months to implement Salesforce to 3.5 months. That verdict is still out on whether that'll happen or not, because there's a lot of inefficiencies overall, right? So if we think of solving and identifying problems and shift our focus there, services teams are very much needed for that. And I don't think there's an alternative for that today.
Makes sense. And with AI, I've kind of been talking about this, and what I'm been feeling and sharing is that I think the disruption, especially in the Salesforce ecosystem and platform with AI, is going to come from apps and ideas and solutions outside of the Salesforce platform and outside Salesforce, not from within. Back to the complexity, what they currently have, etc. My gut is that the disruption is going to come from these new AI startups, these new AI apps, these new AI XYZ outside of Salesforce, instead of Salesforce solving the AI disruption internally. Has been my feeling on where things are going.
I think the upstarts are certainly challenging it, and they're probably doing it at a very rapid pace. So if you think about someone that's trying to build a bike, an electric bike, versus someone that's trying to move a rocket from point A to point B. The pace at which you build that base for a rocket to move from point A to point B is going to be slow, right? Like it takes on an average about, I think, 2 to 3 weeks for a rocket to go from its place where it was built to the place where it was launched, right? Because it goes at, like, I think it was like, if I remember correct, like a half a kilometer an hour or something like that, or something to that effect, right? But if you're building a bike, you could build that in a day, right? And that rapid iteration is there. But when you get bigger and bigger, it gets slower and slower for you to do that fast release. I think that's why there is that struggle of how do you kind of like keep up.
Yep. And we always end with a couple, it's been fascinating discussion with a couple questions, I guess, one for S-Docs and one for Anand. So with S-Docs, I guess the next 3 to 5 years, what's the future that you see and vision for S-Docs?
Yeah. So number one, I mean, HubSpot was an experiment, right? I love experiments. It was an experiment to see, can we go out of the Salesforce ecosystem, and is there a need? And that certainly was validated, right? So HubSpot was the first stop, and I think we're evaluating other platforms. Not really sure where we'll land on that. So that's kind of where we're headed, because again, if we can bring simple to other platforms, why not, right? So that's part one. Part two, a lot of times I think we're the upstart that's challenging the incumbent in that space. So the e-sign document automation industry is about close to about a $6 billion industry. And there's enough players there, and there's regional players. So there's a lot of opportunity there just by the virtue of that. So that's broadly where S-Docs, of course, we want to think about AI and think about what AI with Salesforce means, what Agentforce means. All of this is going to like be bombarded at us in about 10 days, give or take, where, probably names will change. Maybe it's not Agentforce anymore. I don't know. Right. They're probably going to make a name change. I'm going to bet my job that they're going to make a name change on something. Maybe Data Cloud's not.
You heard it here first. He's betting his job.
Yeah. So I'm sure they will make a change on some name. It just feels like it. For me, I mean, honestly, I'm excited about the trajectory that I'm in right now. And, I honestly wish I could just take S-Docs to be the unicorn that we want this to be, and then retire and move on. Right. I've got a small young one and probably just spend enough time with him. But, that's my wish. And I hope we get that to be real soon.
Awesome. Well, it was great having you on. It was a great discussion. Again, every episode we have is a little bit different. That was great. You have a lot of background in Salesforce. You've seen a lot of things. It was really great to get your background and what you've seen and your expertise, because clearly you've been there around the block a few times and have seen it all. So it was great having you on, and we really appreciate having you on today.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, Avinash and John.